Welcome back to The Critique. Today, we're breaking down a script titled Every Chocolate Explained. It covers the history, chemistry, and production of 10 chocolate types, from Aztec drinks to modern ruby chocolate. Let's get right to it.
I'm ready.
So, looking at the big picture here, I think the main thing holding this back is the organization.
Yeah.
The material right now functions more like a disjointed listicle.
A listicle. That's the perfect word for it.
And it's really missing this huge opportunity to present the history of chocolate as an evolutionary story, a narrative of technology and taste.
I felt that immediately. I was reading through it and it felt like I was getting whiplash. We start with dark chocolate, 1500 BCE. Okay, that makes sense.
The logical starting point.
But then we jump to milk chocolate in 1875, then white in 1930, ruby in 2017, and then all of a sudden, we're back in the 16th century for Modica chocolate.
Right, and then the Napoleonic Wars for Gianduja.
It's all over the place.
It's jarring. It feels like someone just shuffled a deck of index cards. The information itself is good, but the logic isn't there.
And it's not just that the dates are out of order,
No, it's more than that.
It's that by isolating each type in this random sequence, the listener loses the thread of how one invention actually led to another.
Yes.
For example, the script mentions conching, the process that makes Belgian chocolate so smooth. But then, pages later, it mentions that Modica chocolate isn't conched.
And because they're so far apart, you lose that tension between them.
Exactly. You miss the fact that Conching wasn't just some random idea. It was a revolution, right? It was designed to solve the very problem that Modica represents.
The grittiness.
So I guess the question is just putting them in chronological order enough? Or does the whole framing need to change?
I think that's the key. The suggestion here is to reorder the sections to follow a problem-solution structure.
An evolutionary structure.
Exactly. That lets you show how these technological hurdles, like, water spoiling chocolate or cacao's natural bitterness, directly led to creating new varieties.
So it's not just this happened, then this happened.
It's this happened because this other thing was broken.
That is so much more compelling. Okay, so if we were to map that out for the writer, where would we start?
You have to start with the original forms, right? To set a baseline. The script mentions drinking chocolate, which the Mayans and Aztecs had.
Cold, bitter, with chili.
And then you've got Modica, which is described as grainy and processed at low temperature.
So those are the problems. Gritty, bitter, unrefined.
Correct. Then you introduce the Industrial Revolution of chocolate. You transition into dark chocolate and the invention of conching.
By Rudolf Lindt.
And you frame that smooth, melting texture not just as a feature, but as a direct answer to the grittiness of the ancient styles we just talked about.
That makes sense. But what about milk chocolate? The script just treats it like another flavor, but the backstory in the notes is fascinating. It sounds like it was a huge chemical challenge.
Oh, it was a nightmare to invent. The source material has this great detail about Daniel Peter.
Right, yeah.
It says he spent 8 years failing to combine milk and chocolate.
Because of the water content. It kept seizing up.
See, that's the hook. If the writer puts milk chocolate right after dark chocolate, that story becomes this saga about overcoming chemistry.
It wasn't just, let's add milk. It was, how do we add milk without destroying everything?
And the solution wasn't just, trying harder. It was a collaboration with Henri Nestlé.
With the powdered milk, right.
Who had invented powdered milk, exactly. And that specific innovation,
removing the water.
Removing the water before you mix, that's what solved the separation issue.
So the narrative becomes, we fix the texture with conching, then we fix the bitterness with powdered milk.
And you can apply that same problem-solution logic to Gianduja. The notes explicitly say it was created during the Napoleonic Wars because a British blockade made cacao scarce.
I love that section, but it's buried at the end right now.
If you move it up into this innovation era, you can frame it as scarcity breeding creativity.
The chocolatiers had to use hazelnuts to stretch their supply. They just couldn't get enough beans.
And it directly parallels the later invention of Nutella post-World War II, which the script mentions. If you group these industrial innovations together, it becomes a story about economic necessity driving flavor.
That is so much richer than just saying Gianduja involves hazelnuts.
Totally. It turns a list of facts into a history of survival.
Okay, that's a solid structural fix. But I do worry a little that even if the timeline is perfect, the listener might still tune out if the science bits feel too dry.
Which brings us to our second big critique point. While the script has some excellent chemical data in it, it often fails to explicitly connect those technical specs to what the consumer actually tastes and feels.
Yeah, I felt that disconnect too. The script is pretty heavy on terms like lipolysis, polymorphism, the Maillard reaction.
And it treats them like they're self-explanatory.
But does the average person know how a chemical reaction translates to flavor on their tongue? Probably not.
Right. The writer clearly knows their stuff. That's not the issue. The weakness is in the translation. Take the part about American chocolate.
Okay.
It says that giants like Hershey use partially lipolyzed milk. It's accurate, but the script needs to do more work to explain why that matters.
It creates butyric acid, right?
Yes, but even saying butyric acid is just another technical term. You have to explain that it's the same compound found in Parmesan cheese and, to be frank, vomit. And that's why many Europeans say American chocolate tastes like vomit, while Americans just taste a sour tang that they associate with their childhood.
That is a huge, huge cultural detail to leave out. If you just say lipolysis, you miss that whole story.
The suggestion here is pretty simple. Use the so what lens.
The so what lens?
Every single time a chemical process or a percentage is mentioned, the writer should immediately describe the mouthfeel or the flavor consequence using really evocative language.
Okay, let's try to workshop that a little for the writer. Let's look at the blonde chocolate section.
Good example.
The current draft says something like, blonde chocolate was discovered when a chef left white chocolate in a bain-marie. The Maillard reaction browns the milk solids at 120 degrees Celsius.
Accurate, but it reads like a lab.
Totally. So how do we fix that? How do we apply the so what lens?
I think you need to focus on the transformation. I'd rewrite it to something like, when the chef left the chocolate in the heat, the gentle warmth triggered the Maillard reaction.
The same thing that turns bread into toast?
The very same process that turns bread into toast. And slowly, the sugar and milk solids began to caramelize, transforming the flat sweetness of white chocolate into these complex, savory notes of shortbread and roasted nuts.
That is infinitely better. You can actually taste the toasted part when you compare it to something everyone knows.
It anchors the science in a real experience.
Right.
And we should do the same for white chocolate. The script mentions the controversy, the purists who say it's not real chocolate.
Because it has no cacao solids.
Exactly. It just has cocoa butter, sugar, and milk. But is the ingredient list the most interesting part? The script also notes that cocoa butter melts at body temperature.
That's the so what. That's why it's kind of a pain to work with, but it's also why it feels so incredibly luxurious.
And it's described as a canvas for other flavors. The writer should lean into that. Explain that because it's missing the solids. It doesn't just taste different. It behaves differently.
It physically coats your mouth in a different way. It's a texture as much as a flavor.
Yes. Now, what about ruby chocolate? That section feels like it's begging for this kind of deepening, but right now it's a bit vague.
Very vague.
The material mentions precursors in certain beans and a berry-like flavor, and that it took the company 13 years to figure it out.
Berry-like is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence.
It's so generic. The feedback here should be to explain what that actually tastes like. It's not just sweet. It has this acidic punch, this tartness.
And that acidity is the direct result of those precursors.
Connect the chemistry to the taste. Don't just say it's pink. Say it tastes bright and sour, almost like a raspberry, even though there's no fruit in it. That paradox is what makes ruby so interesting.
That's the story, exactly. It's bridging that gap between the lab and the living room.
Okay, let's move on to our third and final critique. We've covered structure and sensory details, but there's a thematic layer missing. The script misses a really compelling opportunity to contrast the drive for consistency, industrial chocolate, against the appreciation of nuance, which you find in single origin and raw chocolate.
I completely agree. The sections on single origin and raw feel tacked on, like they're just the next items on the list.
Right. The script gives us facts, like the Chuo village producing only 20 tons a year, or that Madagascar beans are fruity, but it doesn't explain the massive cultural shift that this represents.
The argument here is that the writer should frame these later sections as a direct reaction against the earlier sections.
A backlash. A backlash. We just spent all this time talking about Nestle and Hershey trying to make every single bar taste identical.
Right. The whole point of industrial chocolate is that a bar in New York tastes exactly the same as a bar in Tokyo. Consistency is king.
And now you have this entire movement going in the complete opposite direction. So the suggestion is to contrast that standardization with the winification of chocolate.
That is a perfect comparison.
The script sort of touches on it, saying chocolatiers began treating cacao like wine grapes, but it doesn't really dig into why that matters to us, the eaters.
So we use the single origin section to really talk about terroir. The script mentions Ecuadorian cacao has floral notes, and Madagascar beans are acidic.
Yeah.
Use that to explain why blending, which is what the big companies do, makes chocolate taste the same, while single origin makes it taste like a place.
It's the difference between a McDonald's burger, which is engineered for consistency, and a steak from a specific named farm. One is about reliability, the other is about character.
Exactly. And you can build on that when you get to the raw chocolate section.
Okay.
The notes say raw chocolate is kept under 42 degrees Celsius to preserve enzymes.
Yes, and the script admits it can be grittier and more astringent.
Which, if you're thinking about that smooth Belgian chocolate we just discussed, sounds like a bad thing.
But for this movement, it's a feature, not a bug.
So we should suggest the writer contrast this directly with the dark chocolate roasting process, which happens at, 120 to 140 degrees?
A massive temperature difference.
And discuss the trade-off. The writer should explicitly ask the audience, what do you want? Do you want the smooth, developed flavor of roasted beans? Or do you want the astringent, antioxidant-rich punch of raw cacao?
It creates a real choice. It engages the listener. And thinking about it, we can bring Modica chocolate back in here.
Ooh, interesting. How?
Well, Modica is ancient, right? From the 16th century, but its process aligns perfectly with modern raw trends.
The low temperature? Under 40 degrees?
And the undissolved sugar crystals, that stone-like texture, it validates the idea that smooth isn't always the goal.
That's a great connection. It shows that texture is cyclical. We go from ancient grit to modern craft grit.
It really ties the whole history together. You start with the grit of Modica. You invent conching to get rid of it. And then a century and a half later, people are going back to raw processing to recapture some of that nuance.
It's a perfect circle.
And that turns the script from a lecture into a story about human preference, about how our definition of good chocolate is always changing.
And that is a much, much more interesting story than just, here are 10 types of chocolate.
Absolutely.
Okay, we have covered a lot of ground. Let's try to distill this down into clear, actionable takeaways for the writer.
Let's lay it out.
First, restructure for narrative. You need to move from a list of types to a history of innovation.
Cause and effect.
Group your sections by technological leaps. Start with the ancients and the texture problems. Move to the industrial solutions like milk chocolate, the scarcity innovations like gianduja, and then end with the modern reactions.
Don't just sort by date, sort by the story.
Second, connect science to sensation. Don't just list the Maillard reaction or lipolysis as facts.
Use the so what lens.
Explicitly link these chemical processes to the specific tasting note. Tell us about the toasted bread flavor. Tell us about the sour tang of butyric acid. If you mention a chemical, tell us what it tastes like.
Right.
And third, highlight the philosophy. Contrast the industrial drive for smoothness and consistency, conching, blending, with the modern craft movement's return to texture and terroir.
Show us the conflict between the factory and the farm.
We invite you to apply the structural and thematic lenses to your draft. The research is already there. It's deep, it's accurate. It just needs to be woven into a tighter story. We would love to see the revised version for a follow-up.
Definitely. The hardest part, which is gathering all those facts, is already done. Now it's about the storytelling.
Thank you for listening to The Critique. We look forward to seeing your next draft.